Hi there, this is Jason from English Raven. How are you today? This tutorial is going to begin with what I think is a fundamental basic for any sort of professional materials design, and that is your header and your footer. Basically, how are you going to create a nice frame for a template that you can then put your content into? This can be really the difference between something that looks quite snazzy and quite professional looking and something that looks like it was just, copied and pasted and whipped up in Microsoft Word. That's fine for some of the stuff you might like to do in your class or with your learners, but, if you really are interested in going that extra step and looking really good with your materials, as well as creating a few practical and pragmatic sort of avenues for your material. I'll talk about that more in a moment. I think the header and the footer is a good place to start. Now I am using Microsoft Word here. I'm using the 2007 edition. It's getting a little bit old. You may be using a more recent edition or an older edition. Some of the menu options that you can see may be a little bit different on your version of Microsoft Word, but I think some of the fundamental basics of what I'm doing you'll be able to do in any version of Word. You may just need to manipulate your menus a little bit differently. So look, I've got a document open here, and I'm going to, my intention is to make a template that I can then use later for some sort of material. So it begins with a template, something that you can go back to and adjust and adapt as you need to. And you can see at the moment I'm in portrait mode. I'm actually going to change this. I'm going to change my page layout to landscape. And there's a couple of reasons, generally speaking, why I prefer landscape these days. It's a better use of the paper in some ways. It has a more free and open feel when you put something like that down on the table in front of the learners. And just by the shape of, just the dimensions of landscape, if you're going to double up and use your material as something that you present up on a beam projector, up on a screen, or on an IWB, interactive whiteboard, this is a much better use of your screen space. So I'm going to work with landscape. Now, in Microsoft Word, to get your header and footer open, it's really quite simple. You move your cursor up to somewhere close to the top of the page or down close to the bottom of the page and just double click. Okay, there you go. Now what we're actually doing now is looking at a sort of a second screen for the document, a background layer of the document, and this is where the header and footer can be created. Now depending on your version of Word, they may give you options for automatic headers and footers. They'll give you a range of options, like, for example, this. And look, that looks okay. That looks fine. You could work with that. I think it's a bit boring, and I think it's pretty obvious it's using a Microsoft Word template. So I generally don't use those templates much. For stuff that I'm going to make for my learners. I tend to prefer to make something of my own that's going to look a little bit nicer up on a screen, as well as in a printed, even photocopied version. So I'm going to make my own header and footer, and what I'm going to start with is I'm going to go to insert here, and I'm going to put it in a basic square, and I'm just going to drag and drop that into the header space up the top there. Now, the great thing about this version of Word, it gives you a couple of options straight up for how you're going to manipulate that shape in terms of its color and its shadow. I'm going to go for a bit of a green theme, a light green theme. So I'm going to choose this box option to start with. Now, I'm not going to make a green header, don't get me wrong. What I've done with that is I've chosen that because the shadow will turn out green for me. And what I'm actually going to go is go with a dark header. So I can go to the shape fill option up here. Now, I want a dark header, all right? Now I could choose that one, and it's pitch black. It's velvet black. Now, why not choose one that's a few scales down, and it's a very dark grey? It still comes out looking black, but it's not using as much black. So if you print this, it's just going to be using that little bit less black ink. a little bit less of your black ink. Just one of those little things you need to think about. Now I'm going to drag that up off the top of the screen there, don't worry, and off to the side, and off to the side. Then I'm just going to pull that down a little bit to about here, and basically just fill up that whole top section of the header. And what you can see is we've already got a nice dark header here. I prefer to go with a dark color because when I put in some text here in a moment, I can create that dark and light contrast which will photocopy well, but it just looks professional as well. Now if you might not be able to see it here, but you will if you look at a closer up version of this. That little grey band at the bottom there has a nice light green tinge to it. Now there's a reason for that, because now I'm actually going to put in a bit of a name or a category here. Now here's a top tip for you if you're going to use Microsoft Word. Alright, you could click on this box and add text. I don't recommend that. What I recommend doing is working in layers that you can freely manipulate. So I'm actually going to insert a new square like this. Alright, now it looks pretty horrible for now. Don't worry about that. This is all just about getting set up. And let's say I'm working on something that's going to have more of a listening emphasis, and I'm going to call it Listen In. Give it a bit of a quirky name, cliche name if you would like to think of it that way. Now I'm going to stick with Calibri just to begin with, and I'm going to make it larger obviously, like that. And because we're going with a light green theme here, I'm actually going to change that text color to this light green color here, this one. Okay, now go back to your box, click on the edge of it, basically so that the little blue squares appear. In older versions they're white squares, and go to your format, get rid of the fill color, and get rid of the outline color, so it has no outline and no fill, and look, voila, there it is floating above that dark background in the header. Now the good thing is now you can move it wherever you like. Alright, whereas if you had gone into this box and added text, you'd be hitting your tab and your space bar and trying to move it around, and you know, I'm sure if you've used Microsoft Word or anything else, you'll notice the frustration of trying to manipulate text within a preset box. Whereas if you set up a clear box like this with no outline and no background, it can go anywhere, and you've got a lot more freedom in terms of how you set that up. Now I'm going to put it here for the moment. I'm going to move it down a little bit close to that bar, only because if I were to print this, depending on your print settings, it won't print right to the edge of the page. There'll be a sort of little white gap there along the top. So it's a good idea to get this fairly close to the bottom of that bar for the header. Now that's basically the name of the general material that this is going to be about. This will be a template for listening material. You can change that font. I like Calibri. I think it's nice and simple and a little bit elegant. There are other options though. For example, Candara is a pretty good one, I find. It looks quite nice. And another one I've been going with a lot these days is this Sego script, and it just gives a little bit more oomph, a little bit more flow to it. Okay, so we've got the name of this kind of material. Now I'm going to insert another box here, and I'm going to go with this one, which is a curved rectangle, and I'm going to put it over the other side over here. Right, now I'm going to twist that little diamond there so it turns like that, and what you can see is now we've got a nice curved box here, and I want it to stick with the theme, so I'm going to go with that green. Now we've got a green title here. Don't go too dark. What you see on the screen is not always what will appear in print. Try to keep If that's a dark background, this should be as light as possible. And that's because if you photocopy this material, this will come out very light grey or in fact white. So you want to be able to create that contrast. You want to create something that will look good in color up on a screen, but is also practical enough for you to photocopy in black and white and still look nice. And that contrast between dark and light is what, you know, creates an effective photocopied material. But anyway, I've set this bar up here. Now I'm going to make sure that it is about the same distance from the edge of the page as the title was on the side there, roughly speaking, just to create that idea of balance. This might sound like a really fussy little thing, but you know, this is what makes your stuff look more professional. Now, what are you going to do with that? You know, why is it there? Is it just a random bullet? No. There's a variety of ways you can use that space. You could actually type in here a specific unit name or a topic name or theme name, or you could leave it blank, and when you actually photocopy this, the learners could write their name and the date in, for example. It's just an option there for personalizing the document, whether it's from your perspective as naming the material, or whether it's from their perspective in terms of putting their name on stuff and stuff that you can pick up and mark, or that they can then file away. And what we've got is a simple but rather elegant looking header. Now, what about this space at the bottom? Well, go back to that box you made at the top, copy it, paste it, and just drag it down into your footer space down here. Now, it doesn't need to be as big as the header, in my opinion. It can be a little bit smaller in terms of how much of the page it takes up at the bottom there. And generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend, if you've done a dark color up there, not to have a dark color down here. I think the footer should always be a reasonably light color, because you don't want people feeling like they're anchored to the bottom of the page. So I'm going to change the color here. I'm going to go back to the format, and I'm just going to make this, yeah, a sort of light grey color. Okay, medium grey color. And again, we've still got that theme of a grey outline with a green tinge to it, which sits in well with the overall color scheme. But what are we going to do with this footer? Are we just going to leave it like that? Well, you could, but I think the footer is a very important place for claiming ownership of your material, creating a reference point for who made this and where it's from. Okay, so I'm going to go back to insert. Again, it's all about floating text boxes. Alright, now it's not going to look like that when I'm finished, remember that. Now, in my case, with my material, of course, I claim ownership of it under the name English Raven. Okay, now I'm going to make that bold. I'll make it, say, that big, and I'll go with Sego print style here. I'll just use my website format in terms of the colors here. I'll go with a dark green for English and a red for Raven. Sorry, this is a fussy little personal point here, but you know, it's good to create systems and do things regularly for yourself. Excuse me. Now we've got our text box there. Again, we go back to format, we get rid of the shape fill, and we get rid of the outline. Okay, you might like to also center it by putting it in the middle of that box. And what I now have is another floating bit of text that I can move anywhere. I could put it in the middle there. I could put it over here. What I like to do is put it down in the bottom corner. Sometimes I put it in the middle, sometimes I put it over in the corner. And I just try and line up that with the space from the edge of the page as per the top part, just so we've got a nice balance there as well. And basically, when you go back to your the main part of your document and either type in or put stuff in, you know, you'll probably begin with a margin on each side. And again, when you print, there'll be a blank section just along the rim there. So it's important not to get too close either to the top or to the side. Now, that's what I put in because that's my site. All right. I might just make that a little bit smaller. Um, you may like to put your name. You might like to put your school name. But whatever you put in there, make sure that you take some credit for the stuff that you're making. Um, and this has a real impact on your students as well. If they see something that looks this nice, and I know it's only simple, but it does look a hell of a lot nicer than a very white piece of paper with nothing. And they see your name there at the bottom, or your blog, or your site, or whatever it is. Um, they go, hey, hang on, the teacher's made this. Man, this teacher's taking this seriously. They're putting some effort into this. And wow, it looks as good as the stuff you get out of your course book or, out of some, professionally produced material. And this is professionally produced material. But that can be the difference between them just screwing it up and sticking it in the bottom of their backpack and actually sort of just taking a bit of care with this document and taking it a little bit seriously. You're showing them that you've put a little bit of effort into making this really presentable. And not always, but in many cases, the learners respond well to that. They go, hey, I'm not just using some course book. My teacher's making my stuff, and my teacher makes cool stuff. And that's the sort of response you want to get from your learners. It can make a huge difference. It shows you're the teacher and you're creating the material and you're doing a really damn good job of it. So, take some ownership of your material. Even if you're under one of those silly contracts that says anything you make while you're employed at a school belongs to the school, well, fine. Okay, you can say that you own this, but I want this to be clear that I made this, okay? And you can do that by putting your name down there in that footer. So we've got a header and a footer, and it's fairly simple. It's fairly, it's nothing spectacular, but it certainly looked a lot better than the blank page we were working with. And basically now, when you click back into, look, you click to go into your header and footer, you double click to go back into your main document space. Basically, however many pages you make, that header and footer will be consistent. And it'll look nice. Now you'll notice how it's come up all faded in this format. If you actually go to your print preview though, which is how it will look when you print it, go to print preview and you can see that the colors are actually more vivid. Okay, now the good thing is once you should save your work as a template of some sort. You might save this as listening material template or something. Let's say you want to make something that is consistent with this but has a different main skill emphasis. You could go back into this and let's say we'll make something for speaking and we'll call it Speak Up, just to stick to our cliches. Now why don't we change the color scheme a little bit just to show that this is slightly different. We'll change this color here, say, to orange. Okay, a pale orange. And we'll do the same for this one. We'll change the shape fill to orange. And look, we've got a consistent format, but we've got a different branch of our materials. We might want to also change this by clicking on the orange option there. It'll give us a nice orange shadow. And again, going back to your shape fill, choosing that sort of mid-scale black, and I don't know if you can notice it, but there's now a nice light pink, orangey pink color appearing on the border there, which is consistent with our title as well as our info box there. And look, voila, we can resave that as a new template, speaking material template, but it's consistent with our listening material template. It's got the same basic style, but you can see it's slightly different. And the good thing is once you finish making any sort of material within this format, and hopefully you'll convert it to PDF. If you put this up on a screen, it looks so much nicer. We've got an orientation showing what we're generally looking at with some specific information here, who made the material, and we've created a nice open screen here in the middle where we're going to put our material, but a beautiful header and footer. And already you have made something that looks professional, that looks a lot more professional than a blank document. It shows you've made some effort. It shows you have a bit of pizzazz, a little bit of style, and it will come out fairly nicely if you print it and photocopy it. It'll still, most of this formatting will still come out quite nicely with a photocopy because of that light to dark contrast. But also it'll appear beautifully up on a screen, or if you actually have the capacity to print in color, which I wouldn't recommend really. I'd stick to the color stuff for stuff I'm going to put up on a screen and show the learners. So there's this idea of from head to toe, starting with your head to toe issues. Make sure you save your stuff as templates. Then you can open up those templates and resave them under a more specific name to put your actual content in. You know, a lot of people have been asking me how I make my material look so nice, which is a wonderful compliment. I love to hear that. That's great. I think the key points are, you know, don't try and crowd stuff up too much. Don't overdo stuff. Stick with some nice basic but elegant color schemes and fonts. Try not to put too much in there, but stick to the things that are important. You know, a sort of topical or skill-based theme, space to put in more specific information that is good for filing and storing your material, and, you know, taking ownership of your material as well, so that your learners can see that you made it. But if you then decide to share it, and I hope you do share it with other teachers around the world off your blog or something like that, you know, they can see who made it as well. And if they share it further, you know, you're getting people coming back to see what you're up to and to give you feedback on the material, or just to say thank you for the material, hopefully. So that's the header and footer. I hope that you've learned a few new things from it. Feel free to pop by my blog and comment on this. If you think that this looks completely crap, well, fine, let me know. Or if you found it helpful, you know, I'd love to hear from you. And thanks for paying attention and giving me a bit of your time. This is Jason from English Raven. Good luck with your materials design.